Oak Hill Cemetery was a sanctuary of silence on Monday mornings. For 5 years, Alexander Vance had kept the same pilgrimage. His driver would drop him at the gates. He would walk the familiar path, a bouquet of rare, sky-blue orchids in his hand, a stark contrast to the monochrome grief of the headstones. He stopped before the polished granite marker, Isabel Vance, beloved wife, a light extinguished too soon. The words were a formal lie. There had been no body to bury, only a void. Isabel's car had been found at the bottom of Ravenwood Gorge after a storm. The police said no one could have survived the crash. After months of searching, Alexander, hollowed out by despair, had accepted the cruel necessity of a memorial. "Hello, Belle," he whispered, his voice rough with a pain that time had scabbed over but never healed. He placed the orchids in the bronze vase. "The company acquired the Langdon estate. You always said we would." He spoke of business deals and empty triumphs, the words falling like stones into the quiet. The true words, the ones about the suffocating loneliness, the sleepless nights in their cavernous penthouse, remained trapped in his throat. A soft scuffling on the gravel path broke the silence. Alexander didn't turn. Mourners had a right to their privacy. "Mister." The voice was small but clear. He sighed, reaching for his wallet. "I don't carry cash," he said, his tone weary. "I don't want money." Something in her voice, a gravity beyond her years, made him turn. A girl stood a few feet away. She couldn't have been more than 5, with a smudged face and clothes that were more patch than fabric. But it was her eyes that stole the air from his lungs. They were Isabel's eyes. Not just the color, a startling sea green, but the same unusual shape, the same intelligent intensity. "What do you want?" Alexander managed, his heart hammering against his ribs. She looked from him to the headstone and back, utterly composed. "She's not here." A cold dread trickled down Alexander's spine. "What did you say?" "She's alive. I can prove it." The world tilted. This was a cruel joke, a scam preying on a grieving man. "Leave, now," he commanded, his voice cracking. The girl didn't flinch. Instead, she took a step closer. "My name is Lily. She's my mother." Lily, the name echoed in the hollow space Isabel had left behind. Alexander's gaze darted from the girl's face to the photograph on the headstone. The resemblance was uncanny, the curve of the cheek, the determined set of the jaw. And then he saw it, a tiny crescent moon scar on the girl's forehead. Isabel had one in the exact same spot from a childhood fall. His legs buckled. He sank to the damp grass, the perfectly pressed wool of his trousers be damned. "Alive!" he breathed, the word a prayer and an accusation. Lily nodded, her small face solemn. She reached into the pocket of her worn-out coat and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. It was a photograph, creased and softened at the edges from frequent handling. With trembling hands, Alexander took it. It was Isabel. Older, her face etched with lines of a life harder than the one she'd left, her dark hair streaked with silver. But her smile, that luminous, life-affirming smile, was the same. She was sitting on a sun-drenched porch step, holding a toddler on her lap, a toddler who was unmistakably Lily. Tears he thought had dried up years ago welled in his eyes, blurring the image. "How?" he choked out. "She was scared," Lily said simply, sitting beside him as if they were old friends. "She thought you'd be better off. Everyone did." Better off. The irony was a physical blow. "I've been in hell for 5 years." "She knows that now. She sees you, sometimes from far away." Lily pointed a small, grimy finger at the photograph. "She sent me to find you. She said maybe you were ready now." "Ready for what?" "To know us, for real, not like a story in a book." Alexander looked from the photo to the living, breathing proof beside him. This child, his daughter, had been living a life of poverty while he laid flowers on an empty grave. A fierce, protective instinct he never knew he possessed surged within him. "Where is she, Lily?" "Not far, but she's sick, Papa." The name, spoken so naturally, shattered the last of his defenses. "She coughs all night. We don't have money for a proper doctor." That was all he needed to hear. Alexander Vance, the billionaire who commanded boardrooms, was brought to his knees not by a corporate raid, but by the thought of the woman he loved suffering in silence. He took Lily's small, cold hand in his. It was dwarfed by his own. "Take me to her." The journey was a blur. Alexander's sleek car felt like an alien spacecraft in the rural landscape Lily guided him through. She was quiet, observing the world with a weary wisdom that broke his heart. They arrived at a small, weather-beaten cottage on the edge of a sleepy town. The garden, however, was a riot of color, meticulously cared for. And there, among the blooms, were the same sky-blue orchids he brought to the cemetery every week. The door opened before they reached it. Isabel stood there, leaning slightly against the frame. She was thinner, paler, but her spirit shone through her fatigue. 5 years of questions, of anger, of longing, hung in the air between them. "You found me," she whispered, her voice raspy. "She found me," Alexander corrected, his eyes drinking her in. Tears streamed down Isabel's face. "I'm so sorry, Alex, I was so scared. Your mother, the pressure, I was pregnant and I felt so alone. The accident, it felt like a way out, a terrible, cowardly way out." Alexander didn't move. The pieces fell into place. His mother's subtle disparagements, her constant reminders that Isabel wasn't from their world. He had been blind to the depth of her isolation. "You should have told me," he said, his voice thick. "I would have chosen you. I will always choose you." It was Lily who bridged the gap, taking her mother's hand and leading her forward until they stood before Alexander. The three of them, a fractured family on a dusty porch. The reunion was not a fairy tale. It was a delicate, painful beginning. Alexander moved them to a comfortable house in a nearby town. He used his resources not to overwhelm them, but to care for them. The best doctors diagnosed Isabel with a severe respiratory infection, treatable with proper care. Lily, for the first time, had a room of her own, filled with art supplies which she used with a stunning talent that mirrored his own architectural sketches. He confronted his mother, not with anger, but with a devastating calm. He laid out the consequences of her cruelty. The elegant Catherine Vance, faced with the living proof of her actions, a granddaughter she never knew, and the loss of her son, was finally humbled. The chink in her armor was not regret for the past, but a desperate fear of a future alone. Weeks turned into months. Life began to find a new rhythm. It was messy and real. There were difficult conversations and lingering insecurities, but there was also laughter in the kitchen, quiet evenings on the porch, and the profound joy of watching Lily blossom with security and love. One afternoon, Alexander found Lily in the garden, carefully planting a new batch of blue orchids next to the old ones. "For Grandma," she said without looking up. Alexander was taken aback. "Grandma." Lily nodded, her small face serious. "She's sick, too, and lonely. Everyone deserves flowers, even if it takes them a long time to learn how to love." In that moment, Alexander saw not a child, but the profound wisdom that hardship had taught her. He looked at Isabel, who smiled softly from the porch, her eyes clear and healthy again. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be simple. Forgiveness was a journey, not a destination. But as he stood in the garden his wife had cultivated and his daughter was tending, surrounded by the flowers that had once symbolized loss, but now represented a fragile, hard-won hope, Alexander Vance knew he was finally home. The past was a ghost they would learn to live with. The future, for the first time in 5 years, was a gift waiting to be unwrapped together.